Welcome to the Think Wildlife podcast. In today's episode, we explore amphibian conservation with Mark Mandica, who is the Executive Director of the Amphibian Foundation. As always, 30% of the revenue generated from this episode through optional paid subscriptions on Substack will be donated to conservation organizations like the Amphibian Foundation. Welcome, Mark, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
What motivated you to work with amphibians?
Oh, well, I grew up in a part of the U.S. where there are no amphibians, New Jersey, at least the area of New Jersey where I grew up, amphibians are long gone, but I always loved them, so I would have like frog toys as a kid because there weren't any natural frogs. But, it wasn't until I was much older and lived in an area that actually had frogs where I kind of exploded and pursuing a career with amphibians since I really realized that was something that you could do.
What exactly is an amphibian and how are they different from reptiles?
Well, thank you for asking that. Amphibians and reptiles are not really, they don't have much to do with each other. Amphibians are frogs and salamanders and caecilians, and they are more closely aligned to fish than they are to reptiles, to be honest. The reason why amphibians and reptiles are lumped together is not any biological, it's more of an emotional. The field of herpetology was created by a botanist who just hated reptiles and amphibians. And so he put them together into a group of things he hated. That's what they have in common with each other. Reptiles are very different. They're scaled, they lay hard-shelled eggs, and they're closer to birds, so fish and amphibians are aligned and birds and reptiles are more aligned, but the groups are lumped together because of how they make people feel.
And why are amphibians so important for public health?
Thank you. Yeah, amphibians, you won't ever see a frog drink. I think there's one species of frog that actually drinks. The rest of them are absorbing everything right through their skin. The skin of an amphibian is very important. Anything that we as humans put into the environment is going to be absorbed into the amphibians through their skin. And they've been responding for decades now, and so unhealthy amphibians are a warning sign for all wildlife, including us, and healthy amphibian communities can be an indicator of a healthy environment.
And how are amphibians faring globally and what are the primary threats faced by the taxa?
Yeah, amphibians, are suffering in areas where you would expect them to suffer. I already mentioned New Jersey. Development and habitat loss is a main factor impacting amphibians. But they're still being impacted even in really natural remote areas because of disease. So humans have inadvertently moved diseases from one part of the earth to another, and the amphibians don't have a resistance. And I also have to mention climate. The shifting climates are really impacting amphibians globally, not just where you would expect them to be suffering, but in the wilderness, in relatively intact areas of the world, amphibians can still be negatively impacted by shifting climates and these diseases.
And how did the Amphibian Foundation come into being, and what is the organization's long term vision?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. We started with the narrow focus of conserving a salamander species, which is native to our area here, that is in imminent risk of extinction, the frosted flatwood salamander. And so at the time, there wasn't a program dedicated to that species, and it was crashing so quickly that something needed to be done immediately. So we started the Amphibian Foundation in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to set up what's called a captive survival assurance colony. And that's, when a species has gotten to the point where the only way to stop it from going extinct is to bring some into the lab and try to keep them safe while we figure out what's causing them to decline so rapidly in the wild. The way I think of it is if you're gotten to that point, you've already failed in a lot of ways. We try to focus on conservation programs that works with wild populations and making sure they stay safe and stable. But in the case of the flatwood salamander, we needed to build a captive survival assurance colony and start to work towards trying to produce healthy baby flatwood salamanders to release into the wild. So that's how we started. Since then, we've added a few more species that are imperiled. And so I guess the way I see it going is that we will continue to rise to the challenge, but continue to show up for amphibians when they need us until that is no longer necessary. So that's the ultimate goal, is that these species are healthy and stable in the wild again.
The Amphibian Foundation is working extensively for the conservation of urban reptiles and amphibians. Talk about the Metro Atlanta Amphibian Monitoring Program.
Yeah, sure. Atlanta is right in pretty much the center of Georgia, which as a state has a lot of amphibians, a lot of species. And in Atlanta itself, there are 28 species of amphibian that are native. And so none of them are threatened or endangered, but most of them are threatened in the city because it's very hard for amphibians to coexist in a city. So the Metro Atlanta Amphibian Monitoring Program is a community science initiative where we're trying to train and encourage people to pay attention to the amphibians in their yard or in the park near their house, where they can keep an eye and report back. And through that program, we're starting to get a better idea of what species are where. And we're finding some that we thought had been lost from Atlanta. Again, these are not endangered species, but in Atlanta, they've been pushed out because they just are too sensitive. And now we've been actually able to get some of these species back out onto the landscape, working with partners. And so it's turned into this really cool community science program where we're getting, just the people that live in Atlanta to participate and contribute and pay attention to their amphibians. And we've made a few positive steps towards getting more amphibians back out into Atlanta, and we're seeing that they're doing well in areas that have been restored. So that's very encouraging. And so I would still kind of consider this program in its infancy. I think it's going to continue to grow.
And what are some other projects as part of the urban reptile and urban amphibian initiatives?
So we keep our focus primarily on amphibians. In Atlanta itself, we have, I guess, felt compelled to step in on some reptile projects as well. One reason is that we are located on a really beautiful 30-acre nature preserve. So it's in Atlanta, but so it's surrounded with development and urban sprawl. But we have 30 acres of habitat here, and there are, for example, a lot of turtles, and it's wonderful. But the turtles are existing on a very busy intersection. So there's a lot of mortality. A lot of turtles are getting run over. There's a lot of ways. There's a lot of room for improvement in terms of protecting our turtles. And so, it's right on our preserve. So we're really concerned about these guys. The other urban and reptile project was started for a similar reason. We are doing active copperhead conservation. Copperheads are a native venomous snake, and without a doubt, they are the most despised animal in Atlanta. People, not only do they hate copperheads, but they love to hate copperheads. And so when we started the Amphibian Foundation, even though it says amphibian right in our name, we were getting a lot of copperhead calls, people complaining about copperheads in their yard. And oftentimes these complaints they included pictures of the snakes and that they had killed the snakes. And we were noticing that most of these calls were not even copperheads. People were just killing whatever snake was on their yard because they thought maybe it was a copperhead. And so we really saw an area where we could maybe help, even if it's just helping our community better identify copperheads, And so we started doing workshops for these snakes. And so the first workshop we did, it's just an educational workshop. We had 100 people show up. So it's really interesting that people are really fascinated with these snakes. And so, we do some outreach for the copperheads, and we have a hotline where people can call, and our volunteers will come and move a copperhead off someone's property, which, is not great for the copperhead, but it's definitely better than getting its head chopped off.
Why is captive breeding so important for the conservation of amphibians? And what are some key challenges in it?
Yeah. Well, like I had mentioned, if the captive propagation programs are really a last-ditch effort, I consider that an extreme measure. And that really indicates that in situ working with the species in the wild has failed. And so we do these for the frosted flatwood salamander project, for example. We brought them into the lab and we figured out how to keep them alive, which had never been done successfully before. There's no instruction manual that comes with these species. And so there's no one to ask. And so we're trying to figure out as we go. And so what we're able to learn from that, and we are able to raise healthy healthy adult flatwood salamanders now in the lab consistently. And so that is a huge step forward. We've also successfully bred the species for the first time. And so that is another step forward. And these are little arrows to put in our quiver here. Every step forward is something more that we can do to advance the conservation of this. So now that we've bred the species, what we've done is we've transferred baby flatwood salamanders to 4 partner zoos, and we're all raising them now. And as we continue to advance, soon we'll be able to produce larger numbers of healthy flatwood salamanders. And then we're talking about something that could actually make a difference. So if we find a suitable habitat and we have thousands of healthy baby salamanders to release, that's a good recipe for some success. And so that is kind of why we have groups of specific animals in colonies at the Amphibian Foundation mostly for projects such as those.
So talk about the Amphibian Foundation works with various species of salamanders. What exactly is a salamander and what makes them unique?
Thank you. Yeah, so there are three types of amphibians. There are frogs, which everybody knows. Then there are salamanders, which some people know, and then there are caecilians, which very few people know. And in India, there are some really cool caecilians out there. And caecilians are long, limbless, burrowing amphibians. They look like worms and snakes, but they're neither. They're amphibians. Salamanders are the middle as far as the most mysterious type of amphibians, and they still have a tail. So at one point, all amphibians had tails millions of years ago. Salamanders are still the ones with the most conspicuous tail, and they have four relatively equally sized limbs and a tail in the skin of an amphibian. So they, in some ways, resemble a lizard, and people often confuse salamanders with lizards. Lizards are a reptile, and what's happening there is that both lizards and salamanders have conserved this original body shape that all of them at one point had, which is four limbs and a tail. And so salamanders, they have a lot of really unique features, but being well known by the public is not one of them. Most people don't even think about them at all. But here in Atlanta, salamanders are the most prominent amphibians that there are, and they're undeniably important to the ecosystem through all the insane amount of bugs that they eat. It's just salamanders are really secretive, most of them. So people don't know about them or really see them. You have salamanders more than frogs. You really have to want to go out and find them to see them anyway. You have to flip logs and dig in the dirt to find salamanders, except for the really toxic ones, which, here in Georgia, just march around like they're not afraid of anything because they are bright orange and predators have learned to avoid them. But I think salamander awareness is one of our education missions. And in my opinion, is people who don't really love salamanders just haven't seen one before.
So talk about some of the most prominent projects which the Amphibian Foundation is doing to conserve salamanders.
Yeah, thank you. So we have, I think, 5 initiatives right now, and 4 of them are for salamanders, and 1 is for frogs. So we started with the flatwood salamander. It's still our highest priority project, but we have since added striped newts, which are just delightful little newts that live just in Georgia and Florida, very small range. Not as small as the Pigeon Mountain salamander, another species that we're working with that lives on one side of one mountain in Georgia and nowhere else on Earth. So it's very rare. We're also working with the blue spotted salamander, which is a beautiful species from the northeastern United States, and then the gopher frog. So those are, which is Georgia's rarest frog. So we're working with those 5 imperiled species, and we are currently in the process of adding some more, but they're predominantly salamanders because those are the ones that need us the most right now.
Talk about some of Amphibian Foundation's education programs.
Sure. So even before the Amphibian Foundation started, my wife, who's a co-founder of AF, Crystal, had started the Critter Camp, which is a reptile and amphibian camp, summer camp. So it's happening right now. And because it's a reptile and amphibian camp, it's awesome and kids love it. And so the way it's set up is that Monday is salamander day, Tuesday is frog day, then turtles, then lizards, and Friday is snake day. So by Friday, the campers are going nuts. Critter Camp is going right now because it's June 18th. we have 4 camps going right now, and it's going into its 10th year. So we've been doing this for a really long time. And the critter camp is basically, we're raising an army of conservationists. By the time a kid has gone through critter camp, they obviously already love reptiles and amphibians, but now they know how important they are to the ecosystem, how to keep an eye out on them, and how to be good stewards for amphibians, and so it really was obvious to us how education fits into our mission of conserving amphibians because, if we're trying to make lasting solutions, certainly changing the next generation's awareness of reptiles and amphibians is going to help. And so under that premise, we have really built a diverse amount of educational programs for all ages. Critter Camp was the first, but we do a lot of adult programs too. And now we even have programs for 0-year-olds. We could start them off at 0 years old and go all the way up and hit people through our educational programs, either in person in Atlanta or through our online courses. And we have a lot of online courses as well.
So what have been some of the most prominent challenges you have faced at Amphibian Foundation?
The most prominent challenge became clear to us right away when we were first starting in 2016. We're working with the flatwood salamander, which is a federally listed species. So it's protected under the Endangered Species Act, which means the U.S. government is obligated to develop and implement a recovery plan to save the species. We found it under the guidance of this recovery plan, and we were supposed to get funding from the government because we're working with a federally listed species. That is the same year that the administration changed, and we ended up getting nothing. And so that is one of the main challenges. Is it's not that we got nothing, it's that folks with money do not prioritize amphibians. And so there's very little awareness and support for amphibian conservation projects. And so that right there is the biggest challenge. So we've worked to find a way to fund at least the recovery or the conservation of species in our vicinity, but amphibians need a larger awareness and people need to prioritize them more. So that's been the biggest challenge is raising awareness and connecting with people who have the resources to support these types of conservation programs.
And how can individuals contribute to the Amphibian Foundation?
If individuals would like to contribute to the Amphibian Foundation itself, then you can join as a member or you can donate directly through our website. If you're in the area, you can also volunteer. We have a pretty strong volunteer program. And if people are wanting to contribute to amphibian conservation in general, we have a lot of resources on our website about ways to make your yard more amphibian friendly and other ways that you can protect amphibians in your neighborhood.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you and learn about all your work.
Yeah. It's been really nice talking with you too.